Hi everyone, and thank you for joining the August 2025 TAM customer webinar. This webinar has been organised by the VMware TAM organisation to provide our customers the opportunity to interact with great speakers about content that will help them get the full benefit from their VMware software. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of basic announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on September 11th, where we will be continuing with the VCF 9 content. For this session, Kyle Gleed and Jared Burns will be talking us through various upgrade and migration options to help you get to VCF 9. Your interaction during this webinar is important, so please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. If we're unable to answer your question during the webinar, please be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you received from this session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us, and we'd appreciate if you could take the time to complete that. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. And so that brings us to today's webinar. We're joined by members of our VCF product team to continue with what's new in VCF 9. So I'll be handing over to Kelsey Lemon to get us started.
All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our session today. I'm Kelsey Lemon, Product Marketing Engineer for the VCF division here at Broadcom, and me and my colleagues are here today to talk about the latest features in VMware Cloud Foundation so that you can unlock its power. And so we have an action-packed agenda here for the next 90 minutes. I'm going to kick things off by just talking about how VCF can help you modernize your infrastructure with operations workflows. And then I'm going to turn it over to Vincent, who's going to highlight how VCF 9 can help you deliver infrastructure as a service with its automation tools. And then that's going to be followed by Katarina, who's going to show you how VCF 9 can help you deliver a unified cloud experience for developers with its Kubernetes capabilities. And then my favorite piece here is that at the end of this, Bob, he's going to take us home, right? He's our resident security guru, and he's going to wrap things up by talking about how VCF 9 can help you secure and protect your private cloud. And so with that, let's just go ahead and get right into all the goodness, right? And so on the operations side of things, right, when looking at, modernizing your infrastructure, VCF 9 and its operation console, it provides admins with a unified experience for things like health and diagnostics. There's integrated log, network, and storage operations, as well as FinOps or financial operations with its newly integrated chargeback capabilities. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at each one of those in a little bit more detail, starting with how you can unlock the power of its new health and diagnostic capabilities. And so, as we all know, right, maintaining a stable and secure environment, is a constant challenge for sysadmins. We need tools that will, accelerate the discovery as well as the prevention of costly issues before they occur, and even speed up SLAs, right, when we can't resolve that issue on our own, right? And so with that being said, VCF Health and Diagnostics really address these challenges with its ability to diagnose known issues impacting VCF software in a centralized location, right? That proverbial single pane of glass that you hear about, right? We're able to view security risks based on CVEs and VMSAs. In addition to that, we're actually able to understand impacted components such as unresponsive hosts, as well as vSAN and NSX Health. And then if an issue, right, such as a security advisory is identified, we can even get recommendations on how to remediate that issue ourselves. And then what's really, really cool about this release is that if we can't actually resolve the issue on our own, we can actually package and send bundles with VCF's Log Assist capability directly to our support team here at Broadcom, which is actually going to help them speed discovery and, again, drive those faster SLAs. And so enough talk, let's just go into the demo. And so, VCF Health and Diagnostics, again, they work together to highlight both existing and potential issues that will impact the security, the stability, and the resiliency of your infrastructure if they aren't addressed. And so for existing issues that you may need to react to, VCF Health shows the operational state of critical components such as certificates, NTP and DNS issues, and even unresponsive hosts to really ensure that everything is functioning properly, ranging from things like connectivity, utilization, the health of your services, and even capabilities such as vMotion and snapshots. And then if we were to flip it, right, on the proactive side of things, VCF diagnostics will highlight potential issues that you should address based on level of severity. It's going to summarize the issue, it's going to show you the affected objects, and even give you recommendations on how to remediate that issue yourself. And if you can't resolve the issue on your own, you can actually send log bundles, again, directly to our support team via Log Assist. And so what's basically happening here is that Log Assist will automate the creation and the transmission of those bundles, right? Allowing you to really focus on those more meaningful tasks. And so all in all, when you combine all this together, right, VCF health and diagnostics just really works together to increase visibility, speed discovery, and again, drive that faster issue resolution. And now let's just talk about how you can unlock the power, if you will, of integrated infrastructure operations. So I'm going to just start the conversation just by talking about all the cool stuff that's happening with logs, right? And so with VCF 9, you get new and integrated in terms of an experience, right? That gives you the ability to do a couple of things. You can filter and search log events. You can even analyze logs based on powerful queries and charts. And as you can see here on the Analyze Logs page, you can even search, right, and filter for log events and even create queries to extract events based on things like timestamps, text, and even other fields. And with that being said, right, speaking of filters, we've got this really, really cool new log analysis widget within the dashboard that allows you to visualize your queries as charts. And again, all that's being done in an effort to help you uncover, additional insights. And what's really, really great about this is that in addition to all of this, you can actually define and trigger new alerts, based on log events. And again, all that's being done to help you proactively identify potential issues before they even occur. And then finally, you can actually compare logs side by side, right? And even from different time periods or log sources to identify the source of any anomaly, if you will, and even resolve them. And one of the things that I want to point out is that currently, you can actually compare up to 4 streams at once. And so let's just take a look at the Analyze Log feature, right? And so in this scenario, I'm going to analyze log events in my Oracle database. And so to accommodate this, I'm going to filter my Oracle listener log file. I'm going to set my filter to Oracle and even search for events over the last 24 hours here. And then once this is done, I can actually expand the log stream to view details such as the VM name, the listener name, and even the log path. And what's really, really great about this is that I can actually save this query for future use. And now that that query has been saved, right, I can actually use it to compare logs, which is really, really helpful when troubleshooting. And so in this scenario, we're trying to compare this week's Oracle client request with its client request from last week. And so we can just simply customize our saved query by applying different filters and start dates and durations. And then once the comparison is done, we can visually see the events from this week compared to last week, right? And then these log streams, again, they can be expanded further to view specific log messages and the like. But the goodness doesn't stop there, right? So to keep this train going, right, with the new operations homepage, you get enhanced visibility into network troubleshooting, as well as visibility for optimization planning and workload migrations. And so let's just break this all down, right? And so we've got this, what we're going to call it here. We've got the Top Talkers widget, which can help you identify the busiest VMs and the containers within an application or Kubernetes cluster, as well as see, the busiest traffic by flow, volume, by traffic rate, by session and flow count in your environment. And so similarly, you can also get insight into abnormal flows and outliers via supporting metrics and logs. And then there is the VM to VM path analysis tool, which helps basically, plot the path that a source entity takes to reach, the destination of your network. And so with this, we can actually find out how a VM or a container is communicating, with the database instance. And so we can actually understand the hops, if you will, that are basically involved to go from a logical port to a logical switch all the way to a physical switch device. And then finally, you can actually use flow-based application discovery, which essentially uses machine learning to identify network traffic patterns and group those VMs together within application boundaries and tiers that you can actually define yourself. And what this ultimately does is that it keeps the applications that you're monitoring up to date because it automatically detects new flow patterns and topology changes. So let's just take a look at how we can actually use flows to identify top traffic contributors, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the scope and the duration to show me what's happened over the last 30 days. And then I'm going to get a visual of my top talkers, whether they're VMs or services that are generating the most traffic, be it by something like a flow volume, to a traffic rate, to a session count, and even a flow count, right? And I can even drill down further to get even more granular details on a VM level as well. And that basically sort of concludes that integrated, operations for the logs and networks, showing those work together. So basically the net here is, right, is that with VCF, again, you got that single pane of glass that you hear about to really just help you access and analyze your log data, right? And so with that being said, you can easily troubleshoot issues for searching for object metrics and properties associated with specific object types. And then you can actually analyze all the flows available in your environment, again, by flow volume, by traffic rate, session and flow count, yada, 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 right? And you can do this for all of your top talking entities in your environment and even find, again, those abnormal flows for various ranges of TCP, that round trip time, if you will. And rounding out the improvements to our integrated operations, right? We're going to talk about some of the capabilities around logs, right? So we've got this idea, this notion around global insight and visibility around storage and how that's been improved within VCF. And so to accommodate this, there's actually 3 new dashboards to really sort of help take some of the mystery, if you will, out of storage administration, right? And so first here, we've got the storage operations overview dashboard, which will allow you to see storage alert trends. You can see your vSAN cluster health score and even vSAN cluster performance. And then there is the vSAN performance dashboard, which going to basically help, summarize the performance of the condition of a cluster, if you will. And then finally, the one that I love to say because it's so many words, you got the vSAN Performance Diagnostics Dashboard, which will allow you to test things such as like a new cluster entering into production or even existing clusters that are already in production. And so combined, right, all 3 of these dashboards, again, provides that holistic view of conditions, including things like key metrics, health information, and all that's being retrieved from vSAN APIs. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just wrap up my portion of this just by talking about my favorite topic as far as the things that I'm talking about today, which is cost management. And so, if you're in the service of providing services to a tenant, you're often facing the challenges, if you will, of balancing operational efficiency and fairness, right, when creating chargebacks. And so, and obviously without the proper tools in place, chargebacks can be a very manual, time-consuming, very tedious process that not only really impacts operational efficiency, but quite frankly, it can lead to disputes with tenants who may not necessarily have the transparency that they need to understand their bill. And so with that being said, I'm happy to say that the chargeback feature in VCF alleviates these challenges with the capabilities that you can see here. So right out of the gate, right, providers can define rate cards that calculate metering rates for compute and for storage and networking, as well as any other agreed upon cost for any org or region combination. Providers can generate bills for tenants as they're needed, right? So they can do it manually, they can do it by scheduling it, by automating it. And then once that bill is generated, tenants can see a detailed breakdown of their costs via the automation console in VCF. And so again, enough talking, let's just go ahead and see this stuff in action. And so, the chargeback feature can be accessed under the cost option, under the capacity dropdown. And here you can view basically tenant information through a variety of different lenses. And so first, there is the overview page, which presents a high-level summary of chargeback data, including cost and price across the various orgs and regions and all their running VMs, right? Then take it a step further, you've got the operations view, which displays chargeback breakdowns for each organization and their corresponding region quotas. And then finally, there's a project level view, which offers a comprehensive view of cost and pricing across all of your projects within VCF automation, with additional insights associated with things like namespaces and deployments, right? And all the corresponding dashboards that you see here and all those pricing charts. And each one of these views, just basically, quite frankly, this makes it easier to track and analyze resource usage costs at every level of your environment. And then with that being said, now let's just talk about billing, right? You know, the billing capability just allows you to generate and schedule bills seamlessly for your tenants. Basically, what it does, it transforms that complex billing process into a streamlined, automated, and even error-free operation that really ensures consistency and accuracy. And there's three ways to do it. And so first, there is the on-demand billing, where the bill is generated manually. You know, it's a guided process where you enter your start and your end dates. You simply drag and drop your billing objects. It could be an organization or region quota. And then with that, boom, all of your billing information is available with all of the resource usage just basically accurately being reported. And then for a more automated approach, you can click on schedule bills. And this action provides even more efficiency, right? Just by basically leveraging Automation Central. So we can set up a bill. We can just go through the process here. Again, just dragging and dropping our billing objects. We can set a recurring date. And with that, you're all set to go. And that concludes my portion. And now, Vince, my friend, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Kelsey. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Thanks everybody for joining today. Okay, so yeah, thanks, Kelsey. So hello everyone, my name is Vince Ricchio. I'm a product marketing engineer here at Broadcom, focused on really kind of the automation portion of VCF platform, kind of the catalog services to deploy on top of vSphere services that we'll talk about a little bit, virtual machines, things like that, your workload. But once you've got that VCF platform stood up, you have that cloud available and ready. What we want to do is start consuming it. So how do we really consume the cloud, take advantage of the investment that we've made, and start to deliver applications to the organization in an agile and flexible way. So VCF automation inside of our platform isn't new. We have had obviously automation tools for some time, but I'm going to go over some of the things that are kind of new, obviously, in the 9.0 world of automation and what we've kind of done. We have taken some different kind of methodologies and put them in the product, such as deploying things through using custom Kubernetes definitions and things like that. So we'll take a look at all of that. Just a couple slides, and I'll jump into a demo and show you around the new interface a little bit, and also just how we really kind of are positioning automation and tenancy to really provide resources for these different organizations, or we call it, you could call tenants potentially as well. And how do we kind of manage that? And we'll kind of go through how we set that up, and then ultimately how we consume some of those resources. Out of the box still, of course, with that integration with the whole platform, consuming vSphere, consuming vSAN, is bubbling up into the product. We have actually more integration now with the VPC for various network topologies for isolation and traffic routes and things like that. So a lot of interesting things happening there. And so also the further integration with the supervisor as well from a vSphere cluster standpoint. A couple of things in the purple section that I want to go over just from what we're kind of focused on, and what are some of the big ticket items here with automation. And one is going to be governance and policies. The product has traditionally always been pretty resilient when it comes to governance and policies. We've had out of the box policies such as approvals and leases and day 2 action policies and things like that. We have introduced a new policy type in what we call the new experience, which is called the IS policy, which essentially allows you to write policy as code, or we have out-of-the-box templates that are already kind of pre-built that you can apply to a namespace or a project or a namespace class, and have some constraints or conditions met before something get deployed or manipulated in the environment. So interesting things happening there. And then blueprints. Our blueprints are a little different now. We have the traditional blueprints that we've had before, but we also have a new blueprint canvas and that's more focused on the supervisor deploying Kubernetes objects, and I'll talk a little about that here in just a second. Private AI automation, another big focus for us, right? There's that quick start wizard inside of automation that allows you to spin up resources or items in a catalog. Developers and folks that want to deploy the private AI infrastructure to do it very easily and quickly. And then a big portion, and I'll talk about this quite a bit today, is VCF services. You're going to hear a little bit about this in the next session as well from Katarina, but there's a number of services that we have inside the system for database management, for security, for backups, and just out of the box services that are custom Kubernetes for deploying virtual machines and clusters and load balancers and so forth. And all of these services bubble up, and I'll talk a little about them in the next slide, but that's going to be a big focus for us. So you'll see a lot of that. There's also partner services as well, where folks can come in and kind of, write their own services and then extend the capabilities of the product for customization in their customers. Tenant project management. So this is another big one. We've now are getting into more true isolation, more true multi-tenancy. We have brought in the VPC. We have brought in pieces of other products that we've had that helped us with that isolation. And so now, we can provide this more, easily routable network constructs that allow us to really have isolation between actual tenants. So we can do the Coke and Pepsi type of architecture. And we'll look at that just a little bit. And then content management, right? And so we have these tenants, we have these organizations, we've got these services out there. How do we actually provide content to folks, like images and things like that they will use in order to deploy their workloads and stuff? So, and we might want to distribute that out to a number of folks. So we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, as we go along in the demo, actually, and I'll explain how that kind of works in the product a bit. And then orchestration extensibility still being in there. We have just, orchestrator in there, and all that capability to do the event broker services, trigger scripts, run anything as a service in the catalog, and so forth. And then a little bit like what Kelsey mentioned, we are, with the operations visibility, we're also bringing even additional metrics into our automation tool from operations, even down into that VKS cluster level for Kubernetes and stuff like that. So a lot of exciting things happening there. And if you notice on the left-hand side, we've got this provider, consumer, and these personas. And one thing I'm going to also highlight as we go along with the demo as well is essentially what the personas are doing here, because we will have sort of this provider persona, or we do have a provider persona, an enterprise IT admin that may go up and set up these organizations, these multi, kind of groups or tenants. And then you have organization admins that administer just those individual organizations. And then you have the consumers coming in, and we have different levels of consumers as well. So a lot of flexibility. And then just kind of going into some of those services that I talked about on the left-hand side is where we'll kind of focus a little bit more in my presentation, which is going to be on the VM service and the VKS service, or mostly on the VM service. But if you see the VKS, VM service, and vSphere pod services, those are kind of like those out of the box. Some in the load balancer service storage, all the stuff on the left, I guess, is more of the out of the box kind of services, right? Where you can really take advantage of these things and start to treat a VM that you deployed, like an application, and expose the load balancer, to the outside world and things like that. And then storage services and so forth. So we'll look at all of those things. And on the right, there's a number of extended services. I talked a little about a couple of them earlier. DSM and data services being a big one that you'll see right out of the box. A little bit of integration there. Of course, DSM has to be installed, but the tiles and the integration are there inside of automation. And then there's things like Prometheus, right, for monitoring, and image registry with Harbor and so forth. So a lot of really dynamic and interesting services to help really build these applications end to end, and help you to be a lot more agile and modern, right, in how we do some of these things. So let me just get my demo ready here, and my mouse will do this real quick. Should read mouse today for some reason. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and share the screen. Let's see how I'm doing on time. All right, I think I got a little time. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I talked a little about, we have this sort of concept of the organization, right? And we have this concept of, a provider goes in and builds the tenant, builds the organization, then we have the consumer to consume those services and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log in actually as an org admin. I won't have time really today to go into the provider portion, but I'll show you what happens like when you go in as an organization admin once the organization has actually been created, because that's kind of where you start to see, hey, how are we shifting to the self-service consumption? Well, one way we're going to do it is we're going to go and create projects and namespaces, and then we'll ultimately present objects in a catalog or through like a UI, and folks have a CLI option to go in and actually start deploying their applications and services. So when we go into the organization for in the beginning, we'll go ahead and start creating some things. One of the things that we'll need to do here is create a content library. So one of the things, you don't need to do this right away, but this is one thing you might want to do right in the beginning is create your content library. Now we talked a little about that in the presentation. The provider can create a content library in what we call a provider portal, and that can have content that distributes out to multiple organizations. But each organization also can maintain their own content library. And if the provider has allowed them, they can subscribe to external libraries. So we can give the library a name, subscribe to an external library if we want to, and just put that URL in there. Hit next, and now we can pick a region. I didn't talk too much about the region just for the sake of time, but a region is essentially an abstraction across what we call really kind of zones or the supervisors. And this gives us a way to say, hey, US West might have like a number of supervisors or clusters underneath it that are vSphere supervisor enabled, and they're basically zones. So essentially, it's a way to sort of abstract your fleet and provide a much greater flexible automation capability. We'll pick our storage class for the content library, and then we'll go ahead and create that content library. And once we do that, it'll pull those images down for us. So that way we can go ahead and start to consume those. And so we will see our VM images show up here. So a really nice way to sort of manage our content here that we're going to actually deploy. The next thing we'll need to do is let's create a namespace class. So I'm going to create a namespace class because what we're going to do ultimately is I'm going to create a project, and then I'm going to create a namespace, okay? Now the project that I'm going to create inside this organization is going to house the users, it's going to contain the users that I want to be able to access this organization and start to consume. So they're going to have maybe a catalog service, so they'll be able to go in and deploy from a UI, like deploy some VMs and stuff in some different ways, and then manage their deployments. So in order for me to set that up and ultimately get those users into something that will provide them access to those resources, we're going to create a project. And that project will contain one or more namespaces as well. And those namespaces are essentially going to be sort of targets for them to deploy into. So there'll be kind of namespace, essentially a carved out set of compute and storage and some other things like we're about to create. And that namespace gets kind of created there, right? And then folks can just deploy stuff into that. But before we do that, we need to create a namespace, or get a namespace class in here. What the namespace class is going to do is allow us to choose what type of workloads will be deployed into this namespace, or what are the options that the folks will have when they're deploying workloads in here. So when they go in and they pick their VM classes or they pick certain capabilities, we need to make sure that they have what they need. So we'll pick the VM classes that they'll need. These are actually created inside of vCenter. And so essentially what will happen is you can have all these VM classes. There's a number of them that are out of the box. But you can also create your own that can have like additional capabilities such as GPU, Excel, hardware integration, or just a bunch of other stuff you can do on the VM, and then create your own classes here. And then we can pull those in. So if those have capabilities or stuff like that we want our organization to have, we can do that. Then we just need to add a storage class here for our storage consumption. And then we'll go ahead and create that namespace class. Once we have that namespace class, it will be available to us in a project when we create the namespace, okay? So let me go ahead and do that first. I'm gonna create a project. And again, that project is sort of that housing of things that we're gonna deploy. And also, like, let's say I wanna come in and create a blueprint, which you can do in here, right? You can create a blueprint based on YAML, then you're gonna tie that to one or more projects. So that way, only the folks, and let's say you release that blueprint to the catalog, only folks that are in a project that blueprint was released to will be able to see it. So that way it gives you control over what folks inside the organization will be able to see which catalog items or be able to see which services and stuff. So it gives you a capability to kind of bring some isolation there or abstraction. And we'll go ahead and add users. We have a few different kind of users that will have different levels of permissions. We'll just add a project user here, and yeah, project admin, sorry, and then the rest of them will just be users. Okay, we'll go ahead and create that project. And then once we've got the project created, we can go ahead and create a namespace. Okay, now this is, again, where you're going to kind of isolate a bit some additional resources. We're going to basically give the namespace a name, and then we're going to use that namespace class that we built just a minute ago that had the VM class capabilities in it, the limits of how much compute they can consume from those workloads and things like that. Like I had that 20 gigahertz CPU limit, things like that. And then the region, remember, so region was that carved out area, that abstraction where we can deploy into those zones and those clusters. And then also just pick the zone that we want as well. And we can also override that zone. Oh yeah, and then the VPC as well. Can't forget that, right? So the VPC, again, helps us to get that isolation. It allows us to potentially connect to things on a network that could have transit gateways that go up to different provider gateways in NSX. It could be connected to a different T0, or we can have, isolation done a few different ways there. So really helping us there with that tenant management. And then we can also just build, additional namespaces too. So you can have one or more namespaces. And one thing that's nice about this, from the perspective of, like, let's say someone who's deploying things using Kubernetes, or generally familiar with the capability of deploying namespaces or utilizing namespaces, is being able to go back and forth between your namespaces in the UI is nice, as well as being able to understand what are the namespaces actually configured with, and so forth. So it does give you a lot of really nice visibility into those kind of capabilities. And then we can see that the namespace is now there, and the services are available to us as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, I think I have a little bit of time to go into the next section of the demo. Okay, let me do that. Yep. Okay, so now that we have, like, the namespace created inside the project, okay, we can go ahead and start looking at services that we can deploy into that namespace. Now, when I say services, I'll machines. And when I say virtual machine, I mean a virtual machine that would get deployed using a Kubernetes methodology or a manifest, which ultimately is using a Kubernetes custom resource definition, so that we can determine how to deploy it onto our supervisor and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's using that kind of methodology. So it's nice because I could deploy a full VM with a full operating system on it, add a load balancer service and a persistent volume, and treat it sort of like a pod, right, in a sense, and in some aspects, right, or at least treat it like a more modern type of, like, a thing, like something like that, right? So I kind of went off on a little tangent there, sorry. And so when I go in and I see the namespace, right, then I can see what services are available to me. Now, right now, I'm just seeing, like, the out of the box services. There could be other services over here, like database or some other things as well. But let's go ahead and just create a virtual machine here. Oh, yeah, you know what? Let me go to, I'm not gonna have time to go to, let me actually, sorry. I thought I did this wrong. Let me do it real quick. I'm going to actually go into another section because I'm not gonna have time. Okay. All right, now I'm gonna go in now as a user, hopefully. Yep. And we'll go in as an advanced user. Yep. All right, so I'm gonna go in as advanced user real quick, and then I'm just gonna deploy a virtual machine. So now we had I didn't have time, but we had a provider create the organization, an organization admin go and create a project, add some users to it. Mary was one of the users. So Mary's logged in now as what we call a project advanced user. And so Mary will be able to deploy from the catalog, as well as deploy the services directly. So we'll go ahead and do that. So Mary can go in and create a virtual machine. We can see the virtual machine service here. This will list all the VMs for us, and then we can go in and create them. Now, notice when I'm creating this blueprint, or I'm sorry, creating this virtual machine, it's kind of creating a little bit of a, it's also creating the YAML on the right-hand side. So I'm going to have my UI on the left side, where I'm going to have my options to choose, like my image, my zone, change my VM name, all that fun stuff, right? And then it's going to start building out the YAML on the right-hand side. And that YAML is essentially the Kubernetes code, the manifest that we would, have built if we were to do this, right, in another way. So essentially here, we'll just pick our image. We'll pick our VM class. Those were available to us through the namespace. And then we can go ahead and do some advanced settings as well, like adding persistent volumes. So I could choose from existing volumes that are already there, or I can go ahead and add a volume. So if I wanted to add, like, let's say a 5 gig volume here, I could do that. And then that could also persist, right? So if this VM might be a little familiar and might be a little ephemeral, sorry, might be spin up and down a bit, we have an option when we delete the virtual machine to keep the persistent volume around. The other thing we can do is we can also create a load balancer service as well. So on this load balancer service, I'm going to do SSH and then 3306 because I'm essentially going to run a script that's going to deploy MySQL. And then I'll go ahead and hit save on that. So that'll give me that load balancer service. Now, another thing that we can do is we can inject cloud init scripts. So we have a nice way to do some guest customization. There are a number of methodologies like sysprep and stuff we have available. But here, I'm just going to run a cloud init script that's going to add some users as well as create that database. We can also tie this to a private or public subnet based on the VPC that was available to me. So I might have networks available there. That can be created by the administrator. Then I'll go ahead and deploy the virtual machine. And then, I'm sorry, what you can also do before you deploy it is you can download the YAML. So I can download this YAML into like an editor or my code, VS Code or one of my IDEs from them, and then reuse it, or you can create a blueprint from it inside of our blueprint designer, things like that. So you'll have that code available. You'll also see the code once the VM is deployed as well. So once the VM is deployed, we'll be able to go in and view the deployment YAML of that particular virtual machine that gets deployed. So here's the VM. We can see the address, the image that we used, the VM class that we chose, and then when we click on it, we can get a little bit of information about it. Okay, so basically, just wanted to kind of highlight that, creating that organization, consuming that those underlying resources, and then ultimately deploying a virtual machine onto that namespace that we created earlier called development, using that Kubernetes YAML methodology there. Okay, so I think that's all I've got in all my time anyway. So Katerina, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. So let me just very quickly continue right where we just left off and maybe talk a little bit in detail more about the services and specifically what we're doing in this whole world of Kubernetes in VCF 9. So the one service that I want to start with is probably the one that is really excited in the space of Kubernetes is our vSphere Kubernetes service, or VKS, which is one of the services that you have available in VCF 9 to allow you to self-service fully conformant Kubernetes clusters that are really easy to scale, to operate, create different versions, different sizing, really something that's easy to use for our consumers. What's also really important in this whole story of VCF 9 is the full integration with the platform. So as we were talking about the services that we have available in the platform, including things like load balancers and storage service going to create persistent volumes, we can create those objects naturally during deployment of our clusters and integrate everything really effectively. This also means that if we want to do any integration with underlying hardware, maybe some specific things like passing through GPUs, if you have any AI/ML workloads that may need it, it's really easily integrated in there as well. And when we talk about Kubernetes, one really important topic is always the versioning of Kubernetes. And we have really committed to provide you new releases of our vSphere Kubernetes release really, really rapidly. We distribute these using a subscribed content library that we create on enablement and give you all of the available versions. And with these versions, you can then do independent upgrades of your clusters. So when you decide to do it, it's all in your hands. And just a little bit on the versioning of the service itself. When we GA'd VCF 9, we embedded a version of VKS 3.3. This has unlocked Kubernetes version 1.32, which gave us some new things, like, for example, the possibilities to enable FIPS on OS mode on your nodes, better integration for your Windows-based nodes and for your Windows container use cases. But also, for example, specifically for auto-scaling, we added capability to scale down to 0 on your work nodes. So some really exciting things. But I just said we committed to give you new versions of Kubernetes and new capabilities really, really rapidly. So at the same time as we GA'd VCF 9 with VKS 3.3, we also released VKS 3.4. And this gave us access to Kubernetes release 1.33, again, fully aligned with upstream Kubernetes, and brought some new exciting things. For example, extended support for specifically starting with this version 1.33 for 24 months after release, just to give you a bit more flexibility when it comes to your upgrades in case you do want to stay on those minor versions for a little bit longer. We're also introducing better management capabilities for fleet management of Kubernetes clusters with our multi-cluster management that we have in VCF 9. And also we introduced one of the standard packages that was new that we included in this release was Istio Service Mesh. So if you have any needs for service mesh and that secure service-to-service communication, you can deploy an Istio standard package on your Kubernetes clusters. So I want to show you a little demo of deploying the cluster first and walk you through it, specifically highlighting some of the new things that we have added in the service. But one thing to notice here again is that this starts in the same user interface, in the same place as all of the demos that Vincent was showing you. So we're really trying to show you that that experience for our consumers is exactly the same within the same portals and for all of the services that you are deploying. So instead of virtual machine that Vincent was deploying, I'm going to select Kubernetes, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a cluster with a custom configuration, just so I can walk you through some of the new settings that we have available. And as always, I can just give my cluster a name if I want to give it something that I have chosen. In terms of a cluster class, we have, we have changed the way we distribute cluster classes a little bit. Let me just start that again. When it comes to cluster classes, we used to have a single cluster class, but now with our releases of VKS, we have created a cluster class that is aligned with the version of VKS service. This is there for the reason to let you decide when you want to rebase to a new version of a cluster class. Then I can select the release that I want to install, so the version. And from one of the new things we have in the UI again, if I want to control my certificate rotation, I can do that here and provide some other settings for networking as we have done before. And then I can just go ahead and configure my control plane. So selecting the number of replicas, the sizing, the OS images that are available in the content library. And then go ahead and deploy my node pool for my worker node. So again, selecting replicas, sizing. And if I wanted to, for example, one of the new things is we have added the possibility to directly add labels and taints in the UI, which is very handy. So if I want to do that for my node, I can do that here. Just quickly add that. If I wanted to add taints, I can do that as well. And similarly, if I do want to add extra capacity, for example, for the use cases, if you run something like a GPU operator and it needs it, I can do that directly. And this will use the storage service to provision that persistent volume. Also, because our VKS clusters are so flexible, I can deploy multiple node pools with different configuration, maybe different sizing, different kind of replicas, or different operating system. So for example, if I wanted to create images that are Windows-based, I could do a node pool of Windows node pools and work node. And again, the full cluster specification has been created for me. So this is the full YAML file that I can now download. But always keep in mind that what is presented in the UI is just a subset of what the API is able to do. So one useful use case that I do all the time as well is you can download the spec created for your cluster. Maybe if you need any advanced options, just add it into there. And in the same UI, I can see all of the resources that were deployed for my cluster, including the volume, the network service, which is the load balancer, fronting the control plane of the cluster, and also the virtual machines that make up this cluster. And one more thing I want to show you in here is our new CLI, which is the VCF CLI, which unifies the experience you have with CLI in VCF. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to register my cluster to be able to get its kubeconfig file and then create a context for this VCF CLI. And we will be able to log into the cluster and just run our standard kubectl command. So I'm just going to grab that quickly and then create a context for it. And then once I'm logged in the cluster, I can just run my standard kubectl command. So this is really handy because, again, unified CLI experience, you can create contexts on different levels of your infrastructure and switch between the vSphere namespaces and the VKS clusters directly for a better CLI experience. So what I have shown you now was a deployment of a cluster. And if you look at the version, it is using the latest version that I mentioned that we unlocked with VKS 3.4, version 133. So in this next demo, I just want to very quickly show you how easy it is to unlock these new versions of Kubernetes. So in here, I'm going to just show you the experience that you would have, again, if I go create a cluster specifically showing the releases. So you will see in here, I can't see that version 1.33. As a consumer, the other thing that I can also do is using my command line is to get all of the Kubernetes releases that are available to me. And in here, I will see that version 1.33 is listed there, but is marked as false. And this is because the service version needs to match, needs to be updated. This is really simple to do for the cloud admins. All they have to do is go to the services, find the Kubernetes service. Here they can see the version that was embedded on the enablement. So this is 3.3. And they can just follow the links in the UI to go to the latest version of the service that we have released. These are now stored on our support portal. So you can just follow the links, find the service, find the latest release that you wish to download, and download this definition file for the new service. Once I have this file downloaded, I can just go and add this new version and just upload the file I have just downloaded. So I don't have to do any changes to it, any configuration, just simply add that. And now I can go ahead, and if I go to configure the service, after my active version number has been updated, I can select the latest version I want to install, select the supervisor where I'm installing this, and just proceed with this operation. And again, I don't need to give it any extra configuration. I can just proceed with this installation, and it will update the version of the service. This usually takes just a couple of minutes. It's a very quick process. As soon as the service is configured with the latest version and updated, if we look back in our releases and do this again, we will see that it has switched to true. And now just to show you how that would show up in the UI directly, if I would go ahead and deploy a default configuration of a cluster, which takes the latest release, you can see that version 133 is already available there. So it's really, really simple to update the version of the service. But again, most importantly, with this independent lifecycle, we can give you new releases and new functionality really, really quickly. So now let's talk about some of the other services that we have introduced in VCF 9. One of the new ones is a secret store. This is based on OpenBow, and it gives you decentralized secrets management for your workloads. It allows you to inject secrets into VMs, into Kubernetes pods running on VKS clusters, but also into vSphere pods. And as you would expect with secrets, they're encrypted. There's a proper permissions guidance on who can access secrets and where they are stored. And you can use these and control them also in the user interface as everything else, or using that VCF CLI. So when it comes to enablement of services, I wanted to show that perspective of adding a new service. This is from the perspective of the provider being logged in VCF automation. And if we want to add the secret store service specifically, all we have to do is under VCF services, find the service we want to install, agree to our terms, select the region where we want to deploy this, whether that's all regions or maybe a specific one. So in this demo, I'm just showing a specific region. Give it some configuration that it requires. Specifically, secret service requires just addition of the storage policy to be used. And as soon as this is installed, this is healthy and can be used. And just to show kind of like what's on the background, we will see that a supervisor service for this has been created. They always get deployed in their own service namespaces. But from the consumer perspective, again, same user interface. All that happened was that a new tab for secrets was created. And now I can go ahead and use that. So I can create a secret directly in this UI. But as I mentioned, I could also use the CLI to create these and then go ahead and inject this into my workload. And now another service that we have added, which is really, really exciting, especially something I love talking about, is the possibility to unlock true GitOps on VCF and on our platform, and especially utilizing everything the platform is already giving us, because everything we've seen so far was defined in code by nature, because we are using desired state, we're using YAML manifests. We now have the possibility to grab these that are in many cases automatically created for us, store them in a Git repo somewhere, and then use tools like, for example, and this is in here, Argo CD, to do the continuous delivery of everything that we have defined onto the platform. So this new service, again, comes as a supervisor service that you install in a true operator model. So the provider would install the service, and then as a consumer, I have the possibility to deploy my own Argo CD instance and work with it. And I will show you in a demo how that works. And we also have the possibilities as it comes with either using the user interface of Argo CD, or we also package a CLI that I will show you in a quick demo. So first, I just want to quickly show you the cloud admin perspective. So how would you introduce this kind of service? In the previous example, I've shown you the VCF automation experience from the provider portal. Just to show you how it looks on the background, this is showing the supervisor services directly. So I would go ahead and register this new service. Again, similar process as when we were going through the VKS update. So I go to my portal, I find my service, and I download the definition files. So if I download the definition file here, I wanted to show you as well that this is where you can grab the CLIs as well. So just download those, and it's, again, really, really simple. Upload that version as you would with any service. Finish, does not need any additional configuration. As soon as the service is registered in here with this vCenter, I can go ahead and install it. Again, no further configuration required. So the lifecycle of all of these services is the same, keeping the experience the same. And this is really making it much easier to manage and operate. So we will see this will be deployed. This is the operator. As soon as this is running, I can switch over to the consumer persona in here. So let's do that. And to show that demo, I just want to first start with creating a new namespace for the purposes where we will be deploying some new objects. So if I start this, I will go ahead and just create a new namespace. Just for this demo, I'm just going to call it test. But in here, I can select the namespace class that configures things like resource allocations and quotas and limits. Select my VPC, select my zones and the region. Just create this. once that is active in my CLI, I'm now set in my vSphere namespace where I was working before. And as a consumer, I can, because everything is Kubernetes based and everything is a CRD, I can just check which version is available to me. And then with a very simple instance definition file, I can deploy a new instance. And as soon as this is deployed, I can then get the service to get the external IP that I will be using to connect to my instance. And I also need to decode the initial admin password that is included in the secret. So I'll just go to that URL and just test that my instance is up and running. So it's all there. So really, really simple. And now I'm going to install that Argo CD CLI and show you a few more things that you can do from that perspective as well. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all, I'm going to log into the instance that I have created. So to do that, I just do login to that external IP address. Username as admin, and the password is again there, the one we decoded. So now I'm logged in successfully. One thing I would recommend to do is to update the password to something you can remember and use. So that's something that I like to do in my environment. And now what I can do is I can add the destinations for Argo CD specifically. So adding my supervisor and the two namespaces I have created. And now I can, in a repository, I can upload some files. So what I can do is I can grab the YAML files that I have created when I was deploying all of those other objects in the UI and downloading it. I can just grab them and upload them to a repository here. So just adding everything in there. Always add a nice commit message. And then I can just grab my Git URL and create a new application. Again, keeping this really simple just to show the functionality, but all I'm doing here is creating an Argo CD application, pointing it to a source, which is the Git repository, and the destination is my supervisor. And the namespace is the new namespace I have created. And I can just, this is just making sure that if I would have subfolders, it goes into that. And I can just create this. And what this will do is this will start the continuous delivery process. So what that means is that it will match the desired state that I have defined in code, that's in my YAML manifest, in my Git repo, with the current state of the platform. So it will go ahead, deploy all of the objects that I have requested. And the most exciting thing about this is because we have a true single API experience, we can, in a single application, manage both virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, load balancers, storage, network policies, and everything like that. So really, really exciting, everything in a single target. And just to kind of like end this section or talk about what's all in the background. Vincent has mentioned it before when he was walking through the experience and explaining how things work. So we have mentioned something called vSphere Supervisor many times before, and that is the cornerstone of everything you see, giving you this declarative API that allows you to deploy all of these services and all of these resources. So whether that's those virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters with VKS, storage, networking, any other services you are bringing in, like image registries, like Harbor, or what we've been installing, Secret Store, Argo CD. You are bringing everything into a single ecosystem, so you are guaranteeing the same consumption experience, because we're no longer talking about the integration between different tools, but everything natively working within the same ecosystem. And most importantly, for the consumer part, we are abstracting that infrastructure from them, because that is really important. They don't necessarily need to know anything about things like vCenters or any detail. When it comes to the enablement, just to finish off this section quickly, we have made big improvements to make it even easier for you to enable this. So you will see that there is a little toggle when you're creating workload domains to enable vSphere Supervisor. So you can enable vSphere Supervisor directly during the workload domain creation flow. And just to finish off with a very quick overview of few things that we have changed as well. One of the things you will notice is that we have really tried to minimize the resource consumption that supervisor needed on enablement. So the control plane has been previously deployed with 3 replicas. So now we're only doing 1, but always giving you the possibility to extend. And we also introduce the divide between the management zones and workload zones. So you can now create additional clusters as workload zones into your supervisor without having to create control plane on those as well. And when the control plane is deployed by default as a single instance, you can just, with a click of a button, deploy high availability. And what this will do is it will go ahead and deploy 2 more replicas. So you end up with 3 control plane virtual machines. So this will kick off a configuration process. You will see it's expanding this. And now this will just run for a while, and we will see that once it's finished, everything's back to running and ready. We will see that we have 3 control plane nodes and high availability for that as well. And the very, very last thing, which is really important in this space, is that we have also made it easier to bring you new versions of Supervisor and new services by decoupling the updates of it. So now, similar as we do with VKS, you can update Supervisor independently. What this means is all we have to do is create a content library that will be used to store Supervisor images. So I just create a very simple content library, and this is a subscribed content library. So we provide a URL you can subscribe to and download everything you need for your updates. So I'll just go ahead, create that content library. This will go ahead and sync all of the new images that we have. So there has been 1 release post GA that we have available. So that's the one that I'm using now. After a while, we'll see that the library has synced. And once that's done, we can go ahead and do the supervisor update. In here, we'll see this is the supervisor file for control plane, but also our spherelets for ESXi nodes. And now we can assign this content library to a supervisor really, really simply. And once this is in, we can go into update. And here we can see that version, once we've updated the supervisor, our version has changed to 1.30.10, which is the new version. The reason why I was mentioning that as well was that it not only does it provide us new versions of Kubernetes for supervisors specifically, so new functionality, but also bringing new services. For example, Argo CD service being the first one. So if you want to go ahead and use that, go ahead and update your supervisor with the first async update. And that's it from my section. And I will now hand it over to Bob to talk about security. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yes, I am Bob Plankers, and I talk a lot about security and compliance. And today will be no different. Kat, there is a question out in the Q&A that is probably right up your alley about, I think you were just kind of answering it, but you might want to take a look at it. Anyhow, let's get moving here. We've got just a few minutes, and anytime I talk about security, I like talking about our approach to security in VCF. And our approach changes over time, but we really want to focus on things that make you secure faster. Security is something, it's all overhead. You know, it doesn't move your organization forward. Most people are kind of annoyed by it, frankly. And so can we make it easier? Can we make it flexible? All workloads are a little different too. All organizations are different. And so, you know, that's the thing about best practices and whatnot. Everyone's got to pick and choose what what they're, choose your own adventure, pick your own path a little bit. And no workloads are the same. Some need different things. And so having a platform that's flexible like that is really nice. Resilience. All of this stuff comes down to resilience. How does your organization, how is it resilient to things you can predict, things you can't predict, especially, like we've got all this stuff built in. Beginning with vMotion, 2005, vMotion was released 20 years ago. And I feel really old saying that. I will just tell you that. And, but that's all right. The whole platform's built around resilience. You've got just the tactical stuff, snapshots before you try something, even something you've done a billion times. You take a snapshot because maybe this will be the time it fails, that sort of thing, all the way up to, cross vCenter vMotion. You can move vMotion things for hundreds and hundreds of miles, like, VLR, all of that stuff. So lots of good stuff there. And then really trust. VCF's big thing is that it's got different trust models than other situations, public clouds and whatnot. And we've been thinking a lot about the zero trust side of things. We talk about that in the industry for years at this point. And and a lot of organizations say they're doing zero trust, but zero trust means less trust. No trust, ideally. But yeah, with infrastructure, that's not going to happen. So we need some trust, but can we back that trust up with data, continuous verification, and the stuff that these guys talked about earlier, the ability for VCF operations to continually assess the environment. Are you secure? Why do you know you're secure? Do we have data around that all the way down into the hardware itself, server firmware, and that's something that's unique to VCF, the ability to see all of that. And so the trust really that, your data is where you think it is. It's, in a particular data center, it's not been moved around by somebody. The people that have access to your systems, who they are. It's a finite number of people. You can reach out and poke them at some point if you want, like that sort of thing. Verifiably secure. The VCF operations stuff, we can check it and see where we're at any time. And if we're not there, those problems are highlighted quickly. If something changes, maybe it's not something bad per se, but Kelsey and I have often talked about the idea of a junior admin coming along and not understanding, changing security controls that maybe they don't understand why they're there. Security controls are in the way. They are annoying, and they're that way for a reason. And unfortunately, they impinge on legitimate operations too. So sometimes people change things, and you don't want that, or you want to nip that in the bud. Who changed what, when, what did they change exactly? Can we put it back? And that's resolutions, being able to resolve this stuff quickly. Hey, VCF operations, just put it back the way it should be, right? So that's really interesting to us. So let's get into some of the new stuff. To start with, VCF 9, a lot of lifecycle stuff. Update Manager is gone out of here, and that's fine. Update Manager was all right, but it's not as picky about things as Lifecycle Manager, and pickiness is good. We want Lifecycle Manager as a declarative state. It basically, this is the way a host should look, and changes from that, not good, and that goes for configuration profiles too. And so there's been a lot of work done, a lot of feedback from folks like yourselves, and our PMs have done a great job of taking all that feedback and making it really useful. So multi-vendor cluster images, it's a very flexible thing right now. We get a question coming in. What's the way the VCF handles federated authentication? I will talk about that in just a bit here. So multi-vendor cluster images, the idea that you might have different generations of hardware, you might have different hardware vendors in the same cluster. In an ideal world, we have a dump truck full of money that backs up to us and lets us dumps all of our cash, and we can, buy all new same machines every few years or so. But that's not how the world works, right? And so acknowledgement of that is good. And so you'll like 9 in that regard a lot. HA and NSX VIBs are just part of ESX now. NSX is really becoming part of ESX, and that's good too. HA, pardon me just a second. there was a sometimes a dependency loop with HA elections during a patch because new VIBs, all that stuff, it's solved. vMotion for vGPUs. So we've been working for 10 years to just make hardware enabled VMs and workloads, like GPU enabled workloads, not be special when it comes to infrastructure. They can think they're special all they want with the AI stuff and whatnot, and that could be true, whatever. But from an infrastructure perspective, they're just one of the gang. They move around, and you don't have to hunt the workload admins down to take an outage, all of that stuff. Just vMotion. Live patching, custom EVC profiles, let's talk a little bit more about those. So live patching was introduced in vSphere 8 Update 3, but its scope was so narrow, just the virtual machine monitor, that we actually haven't been able to use it in 8 yet. And so 9 expands the scope quite a bit. In fact, a security advisory from a few weeks back was able to live patch, and it's really cool. So the goal moving forward, our vision is about 80% of anything we need to patch ESX for should be live patchable, and so we're just getting into that. But you don't evacuate the host, all the workloads stay there. It goes into partial maintenance mode, and partial maintenance mode just means it's a static environment. We know it's there. If the virtual machine monitor, the process that runs the VM itself, needs to be replaced, it does a fast suspend resume. It's basically like a process-to-process vMotion. Other than that, it'll replace services, SSH, or whatever's got a problem. It'll replace that and just restart it. You can't skip versions. There are some limits to how much live stuff you can do. Eventually, you do need to reboot. And so vMotion is still important, very important. Can't skip versions, so you can't go from 9.0 to 9.1. So all the update releases are going to be .1, .2, .3, that sort of thing moving forward. And you can't go from 9.0 to 9.1 without a host reboot. There's too much change there. And you can't skip versions. So if you're, 9.0.1, 9.0.2, you're going to need to follow along. But the whole point is that you can, because it's easy to do, right? So hopefully. The other big caveat right now is TPM and DPU enabled hosts. TPM especially, a lot of questions about that. Hey, we've got all this extra security, and why can't we use this cool thing? Well, it's because you've got all that extra security. Actually, the security is intended directly to impede this sort of thing. We don't want attackers to be able to. Sorry, I need to mute my thing here. We don't want attackers to be able to do this. And so it's coming. It's part of our vision moving forward. So don't worry, we haven't forgotten you, and we still recommend TPMs. EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility, smooths out the differences between generations of CPUs so that you can vMotion back and forth. Problem has been that so CPU families have gotten kind of wild with their CPU features. And then the problem too is that you need the cluster to be completely empty to turn it on. And when is that ever? Like even vCenter is running in there. So how to fix that? Well, we've got custom EVC modes now where it'll take a look at your clusters and recommend just a common denominator there, and it'll turn it on you can turn it on right then and there and apply it to VMs that are running, at reboot time, that sort of thing. So very nice there. We've got a lot of security in the hypervisor itself. In fact, we just passed vSphere ESX 8 just passed its NIAP, its common criteria certifications, and so need to talk more about that. But that's government and security researchers looking at whether what we claim is true. When we say we've got all the security, is it actually true? And they conclude yes, and then they give us a stamp of approval, and that's good. So a lot of the stuff in here, code signing, we've been talking about that for a number of years. And so now if you exec installed only is the flag for it. Basically, if you try to shut that off, you'll get an undismissible warning that it's off and you have a security problem. Well, that's true, but we still have some partners out there that haven't gotten the message. We got a big ecosystem, and that ecosystem's got inertia to it. And so still some folks that haven't gotten the message that you shouldn't encourage people to shut their security off. You should just get your code signed. Setting secure boot, UEFI is the way to go moving forward, and secure boot especially. And you can do all of that stuff. You can enforce it with config profiles now. You don't need that shell script from back in the day, that sort of thing. User level monitor, these other things we'll talk about. Let's move forward a little bit here. So inside, there's all these layers of protections, and inside the stuff. We've got a guest operating system that's got, well, it's got process protections and all of its own stuff in there. Around that is a VM runtime. And the runtime is a layer, a boundary. That's the process, and container runtime too. I should actually update this. There's a boundary there. That's the process that runs the VM itself on ESX. Around that is a sandbox, mandatory access controls for this. So if something tries to break out of the VM runtime, it gets caught, and the sandbox sees that it's trying to do something that's unexpected and kills it all. Goodbye. And so all of these protections are available to all of the workloads on a host. And the host itself is a security boundary, and then we've got CPU and memory. And CPU and memory promise certain things, but we started discovering about 8 years ago now that with Spectre and Meltdown and L1TF and MDS, and there's been all kinds of new variants since, including some just recently on all manner of CPUs, that some of these promises don't hold up in practice. And so that's hardware vulnerabilities. We've got two main vulnerabilities at these levels here. One is a guest operating system and somebody who's administrator. And so that's a level of protection there. Somebody's going to break into the guest operating system and become administrator or root, but they can abuse that a hardware vulnerability to get data that they shouldn't have access to. And so we want to stop that. And then VM escape is the other one, that somebody with privileged access to a guest can get out into the hypervisor, which you don't want that either. So what do we do about it? Well, confidential computing. So we started in vSphere 7 with Intel SGX and AMD's SEVES. And now we've extended that to the newest versions of these technologies that are in the CPUs, SEV, SNP, and TDX as well. And so AMD, for example, has got a secure processor, a security processor. It's an ARM CPU that's actually inside their EPYC CPUs, which is kind of cool. And so if you've got a guest operating system that supports this, and it's not an all or nothing thing, you can do it on an individual guest operating system basis. It can request an encryption key from that security processor, and the security processor is the only thing that knows it. It'll give it to the CPU when the CPU needs it, but otherwise the data is encrypted in memory and encrypted in the CPU registers too, which is just kind of wild actually. And so if there's a new hardware vulnerability and it's not mitigated yet, somebody tries to get data from somewhere that they're not supposed to be able to get, like they'll just get the ciphertext back, the encrypted text, and that's good. So the initial steps for support are in 9.0, and we've got some really interesting stuff planned moving forward. But for now, it's the same as it was with SGX. There's some limitations. You do lose vMotion and things, but it works really well with Kubernetes and things that don't require vMotion. Kubernetes instantiates a new copy of things elsewhere and then terminates the original one. And so that works really well so secure containers there is a thing. It's an RPQ thing. If you're interested in confidential computing, we actually have a few questions we want to ask you. As we build this out, we want to know what you're using it for and how you're going to use it so that we build what you're looking for. So yeah, reach out. The other big thing going on here is deprivileging the workloads themselves. So we've got the virtual machine monitor, and most operating systems have basically two modes that things run in. There's a kernel mode that goes really fast because it doesn't have to check permissions at all. And it's got the run of the machine. And so kernel mode is fast, but unprotected. It's only meant for the ESX kernel, Linux kernel, the core of the operating system. Everything else is user mode. User mode has protections and doesn't have rights necessarily to anything else, that sort of thing, but it's slower because it's got to check all that stuff all the time. Well, for performance reasons, all hypervisors up until ESX 9 now have been using kernel mode for speed. But, and those switches between the modes, it turns out that the CPU manufacturers, Intel, AMD, have some new technology, new CPU instructions that help make that a lot faster, going back and forth between those things, making user mode faster. And so we're doing that. We're actually moving the monitor down into user space so that if somebody does get a VM escape situation, which happens from time to time, and they break out of the runtime, out of the sandbox even sometimes, they don't have any rights to anything. Can't go anywhere, can't do anything. Sorry, thanks for playing, So it's on by default if you use memory tiering, which I highly suggest, or if you're using confidential computing. Otherwise, it's still the traditional virtual machine monitor. There's some advanced parameters that you can set if you want to control that. Moving forward, it'll become the default in the future. And then those sandboxes. What if we did, so we've got sandboxes around the workloads. What about the other processes? Well, and scripts too. And so we've got sandboxing around the other scripts, the other processes, all this other stuff in 9 and protecting it. So if there is a problem with VPXA, the agent there, the vCenter agent that's installed, and somebody tries using it to attack a system, well, again, the sandbox will stop them. It's mandatory access controls. So that's nice. It's more than just the 4 here. I got tired of drawing little boxes. There's 100 of them, but you get my point. Other stuff. Actually, let's stop for questions here. Content libraries. Do we still need to have Elm configured in order for VM templates to sync? No, you can, content libraries, you can set up synchronization elsewhere. Not really a security thing, but I can answer that. During live patches, there a possibility of lost traffic, even if it's a ping drop. It depends on the traffic, depends on what's being restarted. I guess there's always the possibility there, but it depends on the patch. The virtual machine monitor updates are really fast, but for different workloads, if IT had a motto, it would be, it depends. And that's unfortunately the answer I'm going to give you too. Are you planning to implement a live update of ESXi that have active TPM? Yeah, it's in the roadmap. It's a future thing. So cool. Good questions. Cipher suites. TLS 1.3 is on by default. It was in 8, but it wasn't the default. We're kind of conservative when it comes to backwards compatibility, and we worry deeply about that because, well, our customers call us up and say, hey, you broke something, and I get it, But 9 is a good time to make some changes. So TLS 1.3 is the default internally and for client-facing things, and you can make it the only choice rather than falling back to 1.2. You can also limit the ciphers to just like the 2 that pass all of the compliance audits everywhere. So like I joke here, you're going to have to find something else to talk to your GRC people about. The weather, sports, international relations, whatever, Certificate management. Speaking of TLS, certificate management, and actually VCF operations brings a whole lot of stuff to the table here. Centralized certificate management. The CA Browser Forum is a standards body for this stuff, and they said over the next year and a half they're going to reduce the legal lifespan of certificates to 47 days. Okay, so if you didn't know that, now you do, and that's going to be miserable. Get ready for it. And so how we're helping with that. Being able to centrally manage this stuff, renew it, monitor it, all that sort of thing. And it's all through VCF operations itself. The console, there's centralized password management for the break fix sorts of passwords. There's audit trails. There's all that change monitoring. There's a security dashboard that's it's the beginnings of it. It's got about 50% of the security configuration guide in, and we're improving that in future releases here. So it's definitely a work in progress, and we're happy to share it with you. We're actually excited about it and excited about the possibilities of it. Another big thing for encryption, data at rest encryption. We've got these key providers. We've got native key provider, which allows VCF to basically take care of its own encryption all the time. But if you've got an external KMS and you want to store your keys there, that's great. We have the standard key provider. In fact, that's the much older version of this whole thing. But KMS admins, there's all these regulations about key rotation and key management and all of this stuff. And they called us up and said, hey, what is the deal with this? Well, it turns out we don't delete keys out of the KMS. So anytime there's a new key, so there's a couple of keys involved in the data at rest encryption. So there's a data encryption key, which protects the object. There's a key encryption key, which protects the data encryption key. And that key is stored out in the KMS. And the separation there is, that abstraction is good. You can move the VMs around and the objects around and then that helps you govern access to the data. And so, but we never delete the key that's out in the KMS, the key encryption key, because we don't know if you actually need it again or not. You might have a storage snapshot or an array-based snapshot. You might have a backup somewhere, whatever. And so if we deleted that, there'd be trouble if you did need it. You'd get very angry with us for other reasons. And so it's better to be angry because there's too many keys out there than not enough. And but we can fix this, and so with many problems, another layer of abstraction helps. And so we've actually got a third key now, which is optional, called a wrapping key. And we can just store the wrapping key out in the KMS. And so there's just one key out in the KMS, or you can set it up to rotate. That was the other big thing, auto rotation. You can rotate it manually with shallow rekeys, but in the past, but what if it just rotated on its own? That'd be cool. So you can have one key out there. You can give it an ID number or code that lets your KMS person identify it. Much better. And you're only storing one key, or maybe one if you set the rotation to 30 days. So you'll have 12 in a year. And if you pay per key for your KMS license, that's cool too. That'll help you save. You can't, I should mention, you can't get there by just turning it on in 9. You have to create a new key provider, which you can do. You can create a key provider that's almost identical to the other one. Create a new key provider, and then you can do a shallow rekey. And we've got the code sample code to do that out on our GitHub repository. All right, here's a question that somebody was asking earlier. There's a question out there. Is there a process to rotate VTPM keys? Well, it depends on the key you're talking about. If it's the endorsement key for the VTPM, no, those are not rotatable, and you can actually terrorize your GRC people by asking them about that, but I don't suggest that. Make friends, not enemies. That key is not rotatable, but the key that protects the VTPM data is based in VM encryption, and do a shallow rekey, and then you're set there. Identity broker. So there's a new identity broker. Actually, the identity broker was the identity broker from VIDM back in the day. In 8, we put it in vCenter, and we've been improving it all along here. In 9, VCF 9, it's also available. It's in vCenter, and you can use that. That's the embedded version. Or it can be a separate appliance, or it can be a separate appliance cluster, three deployed VMs. And so you got some options there. When you configure it centrally, then it configures the rest of VCF. The other big thing is generic support again for SAML. SAML's coming back, and generic support for OIDC and other IDPs that are out there. So one of our bloggers, one of our coworkers, William Lamb, has been blogging a lot about different IDPs, and then he's got some open source ones he's been using, and those are options now. You don't have to stick with the big ones that we've certified in the past. So yeah, that's basically the thing about that. The other big thing, the other thing that's exciting for nerds like all of us that are on this call, the ability to automate. One of the big things that happened in VCF 9 was a real focus on APIs and SDKs, standardization, and OpenAPI 3 based REST API bindings and all that stuff. A lot of work has gone into that. And part of it too, putting APIs where there might not have been APIs before. And so one of those areas is role-based access control, identity providers, all of that stuff. And so those are all accessible programmatically now. So if you write a script to configure it, we need it. Any cloud needs this sort of thing. And so you can use it too. That's the whole advantage of it. And so, yeah, and there'll be more to come. Our coworker, Jatin Purohit, has got some blog posts up on blogs.vmware.com/Cloud Foundation, and our Cloud Foundation blog on how to do this, some examples on it. So I mentioned our GitHub repository. I don't know if you're an InfoSec person and you fall in the QR codes are bad camp or whatever. Well, I'm sorry. I'm actually, not sorry. It's even worse than you think, because it goes to a redirector here and then it goes to the real thing. But I've got all 3 here. So if you go to our GitHub repository, the VMware GitHub account or whatever, if you just search for security, you'll find the US DISA-STIG stuff, and you'll find this one as well. So no problems there. But to wrap it up, I hope I see you folks we're getting closer and closer and closer to Explore. I hope I see folks there. I've got a number of sessions. All of us have a number of sessions there. So look us up. If you've got questions, come and talk to us. We do like people, and we're very approachable. Don't think we're scary or anything like that. So yeah, that's about it. Can I turn this back over to whoever's going to wrap this up here? Or?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob, and Kelsey, Katerina, and Vincent for your presentations today. It's been really appreciated. And thank you everyone who joined us for today's webinar. As we mentioned at the beginning, the presentation has been recorded and your TAM will be able to make that available to you in the coming days. Please join us next month on September 11th when we'll be looking at upgrades and migrations to VCF 9. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.